Okay, I did this 13-minute video about a week ago, putting forward my answer to the question of who is our primary enemy. Had to throw the whole thing out because I said 100 years war and I meant 30 years war. I didn't want to sound that historically ignorant. So if I say 100 years war again, I mean 30 years war. Question: primary enemy of the United States today during this secular crisis. Russia, China, or Islam, the Islamic world. Okay? The answer is Russia. Over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, right-wing Republicans admiring, or not just right-wing Republicans, but right-wing sympathizers, right-wing fascist sympathizers in this country, the whole America First crowd, admires the way Putin is constantly poking the Islamic people in his country, the Chechens and all that, blaming them for everything. So in the course of the last 3 or 4 years, pro-Putin sentiment amongst Republicans or anti-Russian sentiment among Republicans has dropped from 82% to 41% because they're incorrectly analyzing who our primary enemy is at this time. And their intellectual fountainhead is Steve Bannon. And this is a classic. This is a statement of Steve Bannon's at dinner one night. He says, "Is Russia that bad? They're bad guys. But the world is full of bad guys. The real enemy is China. China's everything. We don't get China right, we get nothing right. The whole thing is very simple. China is where Germany was in 1929, 1930. The Chinese, like the Germans, are the most rational people in the world until they're not. And they're going to flip like Germany in the 30s. This is a classic example of the danger of a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. Think about that. How utterly stupid that statement is. 1929, 1930 were the times of hyperinflation. It was the Germans had been blamed in Germany. The Germans had been blamed for World War I. When they started the war, that's true, but it was the whole imperialistic system. I mean, national honor in Europe at that time was based on how many little brown people you controlled. I mean, if you didn't have colonies and stuff, you felt really bad, and we gotta have some little brown people that we can, be running around, that we can rule. And the Germans felt left out because the French and the English had taken over the whole world of little brown people, and so this stupidity, this silly envy, led them to provoke a war in Europe. Although obviously the French and the English, they believed in the system too, the whole system of white man's burden. So Germany starts this stupid war. It's a catastrophe. Tens of millions of people killed. And the country's devastated after the war, and they're blamed for it. They have to pay unbelievable reparations. Some of the conquering powers, many of the people of the conquering powers wanted to turn Germany into a great big pasture, completely deindustrialize it, and this set the table for fascism, for Hitler. Hyperinflation, 1929, 1930. You're talking, people had to take wheelbarrow loads of paper money to buy a loaf of bread. I mean, it's in the 20th century, it's the biggest economic failure imaginable. That Bannon compares that to China today. China, in the last 3 to 4, since the Cultural Revolution, has lifted more people out of poverty than in all prior human history combined. It is an unbelievable success story. Okay, they are a competitor. Russia is an enemy. China is a competitor. China is like saying, okay, have you got the balls to compete? Are you gonna join? Are you gonna, like, bailing out of TPP? Unbelievable stupidity. Basically, we said, oh, we can't compete with the Chinese. Oh, boo-hoo. So China goes ahead, or the rest of the countries in the Pacific Basin go ahead and come up with a free trade zone, and or not a free trade zone, but a trade organization, a trade mutually beneficial trade agreement. And so the whole Pacific Basin, without us as a counterweight against China, will be dominated by China, and it will plug into the amazing Silk Road project. Unbelievable for us to bail out of that. That's not them being an enemy. That's us being wimpy, these poor steel workers and coal miners, we got to go back to the 50s and have a 50s type of economy. Make America great again like in 1950, okay? You don't get to stand still, period. Now, a little more detail on this. Unbelievable. The more I think about it, China's history is the opposite of German history. At any given moment, you can pick a given 2,000 years ago. Let's go way back. What's Germany? They're a bunch of people living in trees, swinging from trees. They're barely above apes, and the Romans, they're violent, and whenever they cross the Rhine, Romans jump in there to save civilization, and Caesar's Commentaries describes it perfectly. Germans cross the river. We've got to send a punitive expedition. Caesar's troops bridge the Rhine in 9 days, go across, butcher a couple 100,000 Germans, teach them a lesson. The Romans come back across the bridge, tear it down, and hopefully the Germans are chastised enough so that they stay on their side of the river. Okay? That's where Germany was 2,000 years ago. Compare that to China. China, Qin Shi Huangdi, the unifies that huge part of the East Asian continent, and under one country. And Qin, matter of fact, China's named for him, Qin Shi Huangdi. And sure, it's brutal. The unification is brutal, but they are now one people. And after Qin Shi Huangdi dies, the politically what he set up falls apart. But it's put back together again in a decade or two under the Han. And the Han, when the Germans are, like I said, swinging from trees and living like apes, there's a great cultural flowering under the Han. And I'll pick another moment. This is 17th century. You have another flowering. And a matter of fact, China would even flower under a foreign imperial house. The Qing is actually is a Manchu dynasty. It's called the Manchu. We call it the Manchu dynasty. It's the Qing. Whenever anyone conquered China, they became, the whole thing was to blend in. So the Manchus become more Chinese than the Chinese. And that's the intensity of the civilizing pull of Chinese civilization. Tremendous self-confidence. Tremendous. You can't conquer that. I mean, the conqueror gets conquered by the superior civilization they have taken over. Compare 17th century Germany. So there's this great cultural flowering under the Qing. What's going on in Germany, 17th century? The 30 Years' War. Unbelievable stupidity. This is a mixture of idiotic dynastic politics with religious sectarianism, okay? Protestants versus Catholics, just butchering each other left and right to decide whether or not we're going to be under a pope or not. What's the doctrine? Just ripping each other's throats out. I mean, the effect of the 30 Years' War, the economic impact, was that it did turn Germany into a pasture for about a century. It took a century for basic economic indicators to reach the point where it was before the war. And I mean stuff like animal husbandry. If a farmer has two plow horses, he can plow more than twice as much of his land. He can plow 4 times as much. That's what the impact of an extra horse. But the animal population was butchered too during the 30 Years' War. That's how stupid it was. I've got a whole long list. I don't think I need to go over it. If I get a big request, I'll go through it. But I mean, any period of time that you pick, Chinese civilization is in the opposite place of German, and the net effect is that Germany, until it started, matter of fact, when Germany started to rise after the fall of Napoleon, that's the time of decline, of the Qing dynasty declining. So China, when it's going through its negative things, is when Germany is rebuilding. But the net effect, as far as national character goes, is that German civilization set them up. German history has set the people up to have low self-esteem and a need to dominate. It's just an obsession, and which they're just now getting over since World War II. China, exactly the opposite. Total self-confidence. Not even worried. I mean, like I said, absorbing the conqueror when they have been conquered by the Mongols or the Manchus or whatever. It's still the civilization has supreme self-confidence. They do not have anything in their heads, their national character, anything like what this idiot Bannon is talking about. And I can't believe, the way this meal's described, it's like all these people sitting around, oh, he's such a genius, we can't argue with him. He's like uncontested. That's how unbelievably stupid. And these weren't, a bunch of uneducated high school people. These are parts of our ruling elite. That's who he's dining with, and nobody at that table contests that. I just, we got to start thinking. I mean, we can't let this crap go on any longer.